Let's talk first of all about these 7 MPs being suspended from the party for a full 6 months. A lot of people are saying, wow, this is really, you know, brutal, ruthless Keir Starmer showing where the power lies. This is over the 2-child benefit cap. A lot of those MPs there, the John McDonnell, we've got Rebecca Long-Bailey, Absana Begum and Sarah Zultana among them. They're basically saying, but hold on a minute, we thought this was Labour Party policy. Was Keir Starmer right to suspend them?
Well, if you wanted to make a fast buck a couple of weeks ago, you would have placed a bet that that group of 7 would have been waiting for the moment to rebel against the Labour whip in order to show that the left of the Labour Party, the campaign group, was alive and kicking. It happened to be this issue. If it wasn't this issue, it would have been another issue. And why is that? I mean, I've written 2 books about the left of the Labour Party, one of which you were kind enough to reference. You know, they have now rejoined on the backbenches as independents. Their leader in opposition, one Jeremy Corbyn, and because they had nowhere else to go, it was always going to happen that they would rebel against something. This was the obvious issue. And actually, I suspect, having spent last night talking to actually a member of the cabinet, that actually 7 was probably a lower number than the whips were expecting.
Yes,
so,
there were quite a few who abstained. Quite a few. Diane Abbott wasn't there for health reasons. People don't want to get in trouble. Yeah. Was this performative? Was this just, yes, oh, look at me, I'm a nice person?
It's wholly performative. And, you know, John McDonnell, I mean, with the size of majority that Labour has got, that old group of people who were the Corbynistas surrounding him, all of them absolutely have got form. They were bound to find something just to show they were alive and kicking. This was it. They'll now spend 6 months, you know, out of the Labour whip, and they may be let in or they won't. It depends how much
he'd be quite happy to be shot of all of them, would he not?
Yeah,
in terms of the actual substantive issue, the benefit cap, now, again, Labour have called this, you know, a hideous, terrible policy, a 2-child benefit cap. And this isn't for child benefit you get no matter for every child. This is about the extra benefits. Best part of £3,500 paid to families on low incomes or on benefits for each child, but you don't get it after your second child if they're born since 2017. So people had fair warning. When they've had a child now, they know whether or not they're going to get that money or not. Now, I mean, substantively, should Labour basically remove that 2-child benefit cap?
Well, you know, I mean, this cuts in both directions. I mean, that policy was initiated essentially by George Osborne as part of the whole austerity programme. It costs, I think I'm right in saying, $3.4 billion a year to go beyond the 2 children, as you point out. $3.4 billion is a large number, both in a social security budget, but also in terms of the current state of the economy. And Rachel Reeves has been quite clear, and Keir Starmer is quite clear, they weren't going to act on this. Now, whether that means they will act on this in the future, whether that means that their review of child poverty, and the reason they declared that review was to stop more people rebelling, well, actually produces active policies. The view within the Labour movement has always been, and Gordon Brown, whatever you think of Gordon Brown as Prime Minister, Gordon Brown as Chancellor, acting on child poverty had a profound effect on the poverty of children in this country. And we've moved away from that. And Labour would love to get back to that. The question is whether Rachel Reeves was going to have to capitulate on such a big price so early in her time as Chancellor. And I suspect this issue will come back repeatedly until they have to do something, but it won't be in the near term.
Well, again, to govern is to choose. It's very easy. Oh, spend money on this, but actually you need to actually make choices about things. But again, I mean, we keep being told the simplest way to tackle child poverty is to give that money back to these larger families. No, the simplest way is for those people not to have children they can't afford, not expect everyone else to pay for them, and if they do want to have those children, for mum and dad to go out to work.
Well, I mean,
I'm sorry, but that's the simplest way. Work is the easiest way out of poverty.
Yeah, I mean, then you get into a whole debate, and this is kind of
it's not a debate for most people.
Story.
It's not a debate for most people. It's really obvious.
Well, I'm not particularly disagreeing with you. I'm just saying, that's clearly, it's clearly a view, and it's a view that harks back over 200 years of the kind of the poor who need to go out to work to stop being poor. I mean, this is kind of classic Victorian, forgive me, right-wing conservative view, which
it's not a right-wing view. Most people, who go out to work, who vote Labour as well, think that people shouldn't have children they can't afford.
Okay, I hear you. I mean, as far as Labour's concerned, as far as the policy is concerned, they aren't going to move off this until they are ready to do it. But I suspect that 103 votes against them, okay, some of which were from other parties, is something that the whips will take notice of, and this is an issue that will come back one way or the other.
But again, it's all ties in. I mean, we've had the Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall. She was giving a speech yesterday, announcing, trying to get people back to work. And again, we're often told about working poor. Well, actually, a lot of those people, they're not doing more than like a 2-day week. Well, what a surprise! You can't pay your bills on that. But then we had Alan Milburn, who's now sort of a new sort of health czar. He's sort of doing a review, and he issued a report, and he basically said he thinks that the long-term sick, and that's a massive issue. You've got a few million people who are sick, far higher proportion of working age people than in any other Western country, who are claiming apparently to be too physically or mentally unable to work, and saying that they need to be basically told they have to seek work. Now, there was a little bit of a sort of, that's quite brutal. I don't even think he goes far enough. Telling people they have to seek work isn't the same as telling people they have to take a job. How is Labour going to get to grips with dealing with growth, dealing with productivity, paying for all the things they want to pay for, if you've got millions of working age people not working?
Well, that is the question. I mean, and it's a very good question. And what is staggering when you look at the numbers is the increase in number of people on long-term sickness. I mean, I think my understanding of this is as follows. What's happened is that there has been a movement from people who are going through the job seekers sort of benefit system into long-term pay. They themselves have moved from one bit of the benefit system to another bit. So the numbers have radically changed. That's one thing. The second thing is the really disturbing fact of these numbers is the number of people aged between 16 and 24 who are not in employment. And there are all sorts of reasons for that. And one of the reasons is that we are dealing with a pandemic generation. If you talk to teachers, either at school or teachers at colleges or universities, there's no doubt at all there is a sort of generation that came through the pandemic who were desocialized, who actually spent 3 years sitting in their rooms, not seeing anybody, using their computers, and they simply don't know how to operate.
David, it wasn't the pandemic that affected them. It was the lockdown policies that your party pushed.
All right, sorry.
Young people were virtually unaffected by COVID.
But the point, I'm not actually. That's a perfectly reasonable correction. I agree. It's but the point is, the lockdown, and you're right. The lockdown has had the effect that this particular generation, this particular cohort, actually are the ones who aren't seeking work, who could seek work, and they're claiming sickness benefits. So you're going to have to address that. Now, the question is, do you penalise them, as Milburn, I think, is suggesting, though it's not, I'm not quite clear what he's suggesting, or do you try and actually meet the problem? And if you're going to meet the problem, are the current job centres the right and appropriate places to meet that problem? And I think that's where
But again, where are young people uniquely more affected than young people in other countries? Well, I mean, it does appear, according to the long-term sickness figures, that they were. I find that hard to believe. It's just another way of swinging the lead. I think it's a parenting issue. I think it's a government failure issue. I think it's an employer and training issue. It's a school failure as well. But what these young people largely need to be told, you know what, you're not going to be entitled to anything. You need to get off your backsides, get out of your bedroom and go and get a job. And I know you think you've got a good degree in media studies, a 2-2 from a former polytechnic, but no, you're not too good to work behind the bar. That's what we need to tell these young people.
Julia, I mean, I actually partially agree with you, but the fact is, it's not simply people with lousy degrees from universities.
No, it's people without any degree at all.
This is a different. It really, genuinely, it's a more serious problem than that, and it's a really serious problem. There is a sort of de-skilled generation that isn't looking for work in the way that you and I did, because that was essentially what we all believed we had to do. The thing has moved, and we all agree now the scale of the problem. The question is, what do you do to address it? And simply saying, we're going to force you out to work and the rest of it, if there aren't the jobs there for them to do.
There are the jobs. The employers are crying out for people. We're constantly told that we have to import people from abroad to come and do a load of this work. There are plenty of jobs. These people don't want to do it. That's why they're not bothering. When they're hungry enough, David, they'll do the jobs.
Okay, but the issue is, if they're not prepared to do it, if they don't want to do it, how do you then ensure that they do? I mean, we agree about that. We're saying the same thing. The question is, how do you address the problem? Not what you don't do is ignore the problem, right? First
thing you say is, you don't have to seek a job. You can't find a job. We'll give you a month or two or something to find a job. You can't find a job, we'll assign a job to you. If you don't do that job, you don't turn up to that job, you don't turn up on time, and you lose that job, you don't get any benefits.
9.4, some astronomical number of people, I can't actually recall the number, You're saying that you have all of those people in a register and you just basically assign them any job you can give them.
I think people who have very few qualifications and who are refusing to work can be assigned many different unskilled work. Once people have to get up and do a job, I think you'll find they may find motivation to find another job.
Well, maybe.
I bet you anything. I could get to grips with this situation within a year if I was in charge of it. I'm telling you.
I think this is the second bet I've referred to on this programme. So the first one is those 7 were going to rebel. The second one is I'm prepared to pay a lot of money that the Labour Party probably is not going to offer you a job as employment.
No, exactly, because they don't want to actually deal with the situation, because we're all going to wring our hands and say, isn't it awful, as the country goes bankrupt. Just want to ask you one final question there.
Sorry,
Nigel Farage, in his maiden speech in the House of Commons, beautiful thing to say, I have to say, he called for there to be a referendum on Britain leaving the European Court of Human Rights. Do you think, A, that would ever happen if we're going to put bets on, and B, should we?
There are two stories knocking around today. One is that, and the other one is that James Cleverly has now decided to go for the leadership of Labour.
Not really news, that. I think we all expected that.
And I think in both cases, I'm afraid somebody from my political perspective just raises his eyebrows and says, well, that's performative if there's anything performative. No one will care what Nigel Farage is saying in his maiden speech in the House of Commons about the ECHR. Of course he was going to say that. Will there be a referendum? Of course there won't be a referendum. Nigel Farage, as usual, is playing to his own little gallery, and the Conservative Party are going to elect a leader who no one will remember in 5 years' time. They are both performative, and that's all they are, to use your...
Talking of people no one's going to remember in 5 years' time, Vaughan Gething, apparently he was First Minister of Wales, had to stand down. The Health Minister, oh, come on, give me a break in a few years' time. Health Minister Eleanor Morgan is now set to become the next Welsh Labour leader because she was the only one who entered the race and no one else bothered. Will we remember her name in the future?
Probably not.
I love your honesty. David Kogan, it's an absolute pleasure to have your company today. Thank you so much for joining us. Director of LabourList there, David Kogan. I really wasn't expecting that answer, and all credit to him for that.